Pirate kings, pirate queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea, what's up? How's it going? Let's talk some One Piece. The release of OP08 is coming up very, very soon, but we are not done with the OP07 meta. We have some pretty big events coming up. They're kind of relevant. We just have nationals. I was hoping to get this out before any of the nationals tournaments. I'd forgotten that Liverpool was actually this weekend. I'm recording this on September 7th just because of life things. But I wanted to, at the very least before Dallas, talk about the changes to the meta we have in OP07 thanks to the ban list. So in this video, we will be using data to rank the different leaders we have at our disposal, go over the top lists for those leaders, as well as some tech cards for each individual deck. I know there will be a smaller amount of players actually in these big events compared to my normal audience. So if you find any of this insight helpful in your final days of testing before Dallas, or if you're just interested to see what's been doing well on ranked sims since the ban list, then I hope you get something out of this video. If you do, let me know, leave a like, and if you want to see more data-oriented content, especially the OP08 analysis that I'm going to start working on as soon as I finish recording this, then I will always be grateful if you choose to subscribe, and welcome to Sakura Kingdom. So normally when I make these data videos, I end up logging every single list that wins a tournament on One Piece Top Decks, Second Storage, Firefist.gg, whatever websites are tracking the format in question. However, with this ban list, we do not have a Japanese equivalent of this format. So I just want to take a second, give a shout out to OPBounty, whose data has saved me and given me something to talk about for this format. For anyone who may not be aware, OPBounty is an add-on to the One Piece TCG simulator made by a very, very dedicated team. The application comes with the sim. You can set it up very, very easily. If you are looking to get some testing in online of a higher quality than you would on just the normal simulator itself, they have a great service here. You can play Western format, you can play Eastern format. They even have pre-release prep if you're really grinding to get that promo. They even have tournaments with great prizes for players who rank high enough at the end of each season. And if you are willing to spare $5 per month, just $5, I'm not being paid for this advertising, by the way. I am just such a big fan of them that I'm saying this. They have a stupendous Patreon that gives you access to meta shares, matchup rates, card counts for tens of thousands of games in these formats being played. This is a treasure trove if you are like me and want numbers-based information to inform your decisions. They have given me a wealth of information from the moment I subscribe to their Patreon, and if there is anyone I can recommend to give a few dollars to within this game, it is OPBounty. Go subscribe to their Patreon right now. And if you happen to be on the fence as to whether or not this is for you, hopefully this video can give you a better idea of the service they are offering. Just want to give them a shout out. Once again, thank you to the entire OPBounty team. This video would not be possible without you. Now, with these bans, with the absence of Red Purple Law in Annie's Lobby, with this change to the source of my data, this has caused me to change up the algorithm a little bit. Normally, I am looking at individual topping lists from tournaments and ranking them according to achievement, recency, and tournament size. But for this video, we are instead looking at a very substantial pool of games. The stats we have to work with are an individual leader's win rate, the card counts across all these games played, and the win rates for each of those card counts. We're not using a point system this time. Instead, we are going to be operating primarily off of a deck's win rate, with the number of games played as a modifier to that win rate. For example, if a deck has an extremely high win rate and a very, very high number of games, we can reliably trust that win rate. But if there is another leader with an extremely high win rate and a much lower number of games, we can pretty reasonably say that leader is strong, but the level of strength that win rate gives us, at least in relation to those other leaders with more games, might not be quite as trustworthy. So to balance those factors, we are going to take the percentile rank of each deck's win rate and the percentile rank of their number of games, and rank each deck based off of their distance from a perfect 100 percentile score in both of those metrics. We then take that distance from that ideal point, being the 100th percentile in both games and win rate, as well as the worst, the lowest in both metrics, and split that distance into 10 equal parts, giving each leader a score from 1 to 10, then categorized into the tiers on this slide. I'll be covering all of the leaders within 3/10 of that overall distance from the ideal point with their own slides, with lists and card count stats. So let's just get those lower ranking decks out of the way. At the very bottom, we have Red Ace, then Rebecca, Foxy, all of those are below 1. From 1 to 2, we have Vivi, Dragon, and Purple Yellow Croc. From 2 to 3, we have Vegapunk, Red Black Sabo, and Newgate. 3 to 4, we have Uta, Red Greenlaw, Zoro Sanji, Red Zoro, and Red Yellow Sabo. 4 to 5, we have Yamato and Blue Yellow Ace. 5 to 6, we have Perona, the new Star Deck 14 Luffy, and Red Purple Luffy. And then from 6 to 6.5, we have Hancock and Bello Betty. And I've placed them all on this graph here to give you a better idea of what these ranking criteria are. From left to right, we have the number of games played by that leader. From bottom to top, we have the overall win rate of that leader. As we can see, Uta, for example, has a decent win rate compared to everything else, but a very, very low number of games to support it, so we can't as reliably put her in those top tiers. On the other end of the extreme for the decks we've talked about so far, Perona has a decent number of games, but in that more substantial number of games, she has not been able to break into the upper half when it comes to win rate. So let's get into that top right corner. Let's see what the most reliably proven decks are for post-ban on OPBounty. Starting with number 10, Black Yellow Luffy. I'm also going to let you guys know now, I have not played a single game of OP07 post-ban. The only games I have played since, I'll say about a month ago, were a couple OP08 Marco, some Zoro, just some Kaido, some memeing around. I don't really have as much to say. I haven't done the same level of research into how these decks play in this format. I'm just going off the stats here, so I won't have as much to say as I normally do. What I can say about Black Yellow Luffy, though, is that over the course of this period from the ban's implementation on Ranked Sim to September 1st, when this data was collected, he has had the highest number of games out of any deck here, but has a 47.77% win rate. That is, to be quite honest, the lowest win rate of any of these top 10 decks. So while there are definitely enough people playing him that you can expect to see him at a tournament where some people will probably be able to do decently with him, he is not a sure thing. You need to be really, really good at playing this deck if you want to see success with him. He was difficult before the ban list and before this change in the build, and I think just from my experience playing the deck pre-ban and the new direction that these changes add onto it, this deck is going to be even harder to do well with now. But by putting him at number 10, I am not saying he is a bad deck at all. I'm just saying that the bar is set even higher if you want to do well with him. Overall, the package is very similar. We still have our three brothers. We still have Flampe. We have Hiyori. We have a couple Makino in order to get those life out of the way. We still have our full 4 copies of Gecko Moria to enable those huge, huge combo turns where we get our leader to 9,000 power and get 2 5-cost bodies on the board. The biggest changes here to note are the 4th copy of the Egghead Luffy. That one's not completely out of the norm. But we also have these 2 copies of 4-cost Kuzan and Ice Age. This isn't really the first time we've seen these black control cards in Black Yellow Luffy. I know that they were present to some degree in the Asian version of pre-ban OP07, and some players did start to adopt these as the Western version of pre-ban 07 came to develop. But after the ban, these are the norm rather than the exception. With Law out of the way, this format is definitely one with taller characters rather than wider boards, so being able to reduce cost and keep your opponent at play, make it so they don't have as many 9k swings to reduce your hand is going to come in very, very handy. That being said, making sure you sequence these plays correctly, making sure you know when to prioritize your 3 brothers or when to prioritize your Kuzan, even when it comes to your Moria plays, is going to play a huge factor in the skill expression of this deck and is going to separate those very, very practiced, very, very thoughtful Black Yellow Luffy players from those who don't have that deep, deep knowledge of how to pilot him. We do still have our card count slides here. That first line under each card is the win prevalence. So taking the Sabo, the Flampe, the entire top line, really, 100% of games won by Black Yellow Luffy, in this case, had these cards in them. And then below that, we have the number of wins with lists playing X copies of that card. I decided to go with raw numbers rather than percentages for these ones, just because it might give more perspective when looking at these leaders against each other. So everything in that top line, as well as the 5-cost Luffy from the starter deck, they're going to be 4-ofs a vast majority of the time. We see that Three Brothers Bond is going below 4 very, very often. Makino very firmly at 2. Our first drop-off in prevalence comes when we get to Ace. A fair amount of decks didn't play him, but most were running him at 2 or 3. Kuzan, 2 to 4 the majority of the time, but there are still some lists that are going more classic Luffy. Ice Age, usually 2. Sometimes you get 1 or 3. And then for these more fringe cards, I'll be covering anything that has more than a 5% win prevalence. Ivankov's main utility before the ban was that Red-Purple Law had a harder time removing them at 4,000 power. However, with the ban, with this change to the landscape, having another blocker, having another way to dig into our life can still come in handy, and a little over a third of these games that were won were running them at some capacity. Very, very worth considering. And then everything else is some other flavor of control, whether that is cost reduction, removal, or in the case of 10-cost Kuzan, both. Not really much to say about these individually for me since I haven't tested them. We also have Thunderbolt as a low-cost way to get rid of a 5-cost and dig into our life. Shigan can get some cards into the discard if we're trying to get our Moria plays off. Sabo, basically a Three Brothers Body version of Thunderbolt. Then Perona can reduce cost, as well as Isho, maybe dig into the hand of an NL player. Or it could come in handy in the mirror as well. And then our 10 cuts and our 10 additions. Players did tend to round out that 4-cost Kuzan count before they went into the super fringe stuff like the Shigan, the Sabo, the Perona, and the Isho. And then number 9 is Purple Luffy. This one, I really like to see him in here. Still out here using his life as a fuel source to ramp into big bodies as early as possible. We have all those 4 costs. We have the page 1 ulti combo, a couple of Scratch Manipu from the first set here. This really could be any 4-cost 6k vanilla, and I do tend to disagree a bit with the OPBounty player base's taste in Supernovas. I might play Sphinx, but you just don't worry about that, whichever one you want to. But like, who sucks, y'all? What are you doing? Anyway, a lot of those standard cards from Purple Luffy lists in previous sets are still here. We have the Blocker Law, Diaz Drake, Magellan, Polly, 5-cost Kid and Queen, those big blockers, the 6-cost Sanji, 9-cost Kaido as our rusher, our big removal, couple Gum Gum Jet Gatling to filter any extra counterless cards from our hand. The main additions here are Hitokiri Kamazo from set 6 and 2 Douglas Bullet. And I really, really like these. Starting with Bullet, we can -4 to then rest 2 of our opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less and then give him double attack. Now, the double attack is pretty cool, but the thing that I like about this is that there are a fair amount of decks in this format that will be hiding behind 5-cost blockers in those last couple turns. If you're against black and it's a well-timed Sabo, he cannot be KO'd, so your 9-cost Kaido isn't going to get rid of him. Bullet can push right through. Same thing goes for Bonnie. She's going to hide behind those Hawkins. We really can't remove them because we don't have non-character forms of removal in this build specifically. So Bullet just rests them. Cool. Kamazo's ability to KO a 2-cost when you minus isn't going to be live as consistently. Very often he'll just be a 2k. There will be some decks that have little 2-cost blockers like Reiju. And there are always those games where beefing up a small character, a searcher, something like that, could be the difference between losing and surviving, so he may have some utility there. Just from looking at him, looking at this meta, I think that he really shines in the Bonnie matchup. This will take some time to set up, so I don't know how often you'll be able to manage it, but theoretically, you could play him one turn, play Bullet the next. I assume you would wait so you can attack with the Bullet, but if you want to use Bullet's effect on the next turn, you can then rest whatever blockers they have, pop a Rosinante, and then if you have a big enough body, you can attack into the Eustace Kid, do it with the Bullet if it has been a turn since he landed. There is a chance Bonnie will counter out of it, but at the very least you have been able to soften up their hand and get another body. And if Bullet survives, if you have the resources to protect him on the crackback, you could potentially do this again if you have enough of a board set up. Of course, that is just my theory. I have not actually played that matchup. I really want to try that list, but I haven't managed to. If you have thoughts on the utility of Kamazo, please let me know. I'm very curious. Here are Purple Luffy's card counts. The main contender that didn't make it here that had a prevalence of over 50 was the Starter Deck Kid. The lists that did play him put him in at a variety of counts. I think you could very easily cut the 2 vanillas for him if you want to explore this option, if you just want that little bit of extra pressure and defense on your leader. And a fair amount more fringe options than we had for Black Yellow Luffy. Again, haven't played this, so I can't come from the most informed place of commenting about them. I'm also a little bit on time. I am behind schedule on this video. Big surprise. What I will say is that it's pretty cool to see Sheep's Horn with a little bit of success there, and Ragnarok could also give us some event form removal. Just depends on what direction you want to take the list. Easiest cuts will be the Vanillas, the Diaz Drake, Bullet, and a couple Kaido. And players who deviate from the norm tend to either put a third Gum Gum Jet Gatling, that first Sheep's Horn, or copies of Star Deck 10 Kid or Bone Clay. And then at number 8, we have Mono Blue Doflamingo. He definitely saw some fringe play, a little bit of success here and there in pre-ban set 7 from my recollection. His true time has not come yet. We are still waiting for Starter Deck 17 with all those wonderful new 7 Warlords cards, but he did make it into the top 10 here. This really is your basic Dofi build. The game plan has not changed. Spam out your Warlords, control the board when the opportune moment arises. We do have the pudding in there for hand control. Your mileage may vary on whether 3 pudding is a good amount or too many. I think that if you can't use her, she at least has 1k counter, and we've got plenty of Warlords in here already. I'm not sure how much Perfume Femur was being run in the Western version of Set 7. 1 copy here seems cool to me, and then we do have a Gum Gum Rain in order to filter out any of these counterless cards. Here we are with the card counts. Everything aside from Red Rock, Kaido, Perfume Femur, the Set 2 Moria, and Gum Gum Rain are incredibly common, all over 95% prevalence in these winning games. And then really just a couple of tech options. Mihawk if you want another big body that can bottom deck a 7 cost. Sanji, really, I assume, in conjunction with the Mihawk to get that big board presence out as well. Gion, presumably as a Nami tech mostly. Not a lot of love for Sengoku. I assume that you'd want that Perona turn 1 instead, and, it could get a little awkward trying to save a Don for him in the later turns. I don't know. And then if you want another Warlord, that's set 1, Boa Hancock. Then we have the cuts and additions. Interestingly, that third pudding is not in the 10 most common cuts. People were very, very happy with her at 3. And our additions mainly involve either rounding out those less played cards or going into those taller bodies we just mentioned. And then rounding out the C tier, we have Nami. So as soon as the ban list hit, even when me and my friends were talking about what the ban list could be, Nami as a potential boogeyman was at the top of our minds. In preset 7, Red Purple Law was one of our only truly terrible matchups. And in that first week and a half of post-ban sim, she was dominating. She was up near the top. But I think people, either had a chance to play against her, get used to the matchup, and pure speculation, maybe a bit of copium, there's a chance people realize that Nami is not the easiest deck to play. Yes, it's solitaire, you are not attacking, but if you are not sequencing and defending perfectly, you are not going to survive long enough. If you've heard me talk about Nami before, you know that I have no issue with her being a good deck in this format. I am very glad she is not tier 0 like I was a bit worried about her becoming earlier on. But for any Nami haters, hopefully this eases your mind a bit. She is not at the tippy top like some people thought she might be. We're still running the Amazon Lily package, 3 Gloriosa, 3 Sandersonia. She saw more play near the tail end of pre-ban 07. 4 Marguerite, she puts so much work in, as well as our usual suite of events. We do have 3 Oppies, which I think is one of the most difficult cards to use in this deck as far as timing her right and choosing those discards properly. But being able to stack your bottom deck is huge for Nami, so having another way to do so is very nice. Players did seem to gravitate away from Perfume Femur, though. From my testing with Nami during pre-ban set 7, I think that Perfume Femur is really nice if you are still learning the deck and getting used to the sequencing and the hand management. the trigger draw 1 can really come in clutch. But at the end of the day, having cards that are proactive in your hand as well as potentially in life seems more important to me. And the inclusion that I am most hyped to see in this list is that single copy of Mr. Hanger from set 4. One copy, specifically. Trash a card from your hand, rest him, draw 1. Most Nami games are really going to come down to that last card or 2 in your deck, so one copy really is all that you can need to bridge that gap. Of course, you do have to trash one, so that it is going to feed further into the skill factor of this deck. Heading into the card counts here, very, very uniform. Only 2 cards on this list were below 94%, being Hanger and Sandersonia. And then for those more fringe inclusions, we had some players opting for Mr. 1 to get our 1-cost blue events back, Arabesque Breakfast to bounce, Perfume Femur as another trigger, Deathwink get out of some big blows and sequence it right so we can fill our hand back up. This Zeph is not a mistake. The set 3 Zeph was not played, but this set 6 Zeph, he says that when your opponent activates blocker or an event, a lot of people aren't going to be using blocker against Nami in the first place, but when either of those conditions are fulfilled, you get to mill the top 4. It seems to me like he's mainly going to come in handy as a deterrent in the mirror. Your opponent might think twice about activating that Sanji's peel-off they need if they see this guy on the board. And then we have 3000 Worlds Pudding and Red Rock for disruption, whether that is board or hand. Sandersonia, Apis Gloriosa, and my boy Mr. Hanger are the 10 cuts for this list. And potential additions are 4th copies of Apis or Gloriosa. Those are Arabesque Brickfist, Mr. 1. Some chose to put a Perfume Femur back in, just get that extra trigger. Maybe another Hanger, another Mr. 1, or Deathwink. And then heading into B tier, we have another potentially busted boogeyman who was bumped back a tier once people started playing the format a little bit more and developing things, Reiju. Reiju was a huge underdog in the pre-ban set 7 format, being completely shut out by what's pretty much a 2080 matchup into Red-Purple Law. And so, of course, once Law got banned, the Reiju hype began. Like, those alt-art prices for the Reijus on TCG Player went out of control. Of course, as time went on, people got used to the matchup, and she's definitely a good deck, but she is not the overwhelming tier 0 force like, again, some people thought she might be. Sort of similar to what happened with Nami. She still plays the usual Germa 66 package, only 2 copies of the Search event, want to highlight that real quick, as well as a wonderful package that was brought in by set 7, the Foxy Pirates. Porsche is a 3-cost 5k, so she has vanilla stats to start with, lets you -1 to search the top 5 for a Foxy Pirate, and then play 1 purple character with a power of 4000 or less, regardless of type. It does not have to be a Foxy Pirate from hand. So this means you're getting a 7-cost ETG out for 3, potentially. The aggro capabilities of this deck are greatly boosted by Porsche's presence, as well as our defenses thanks to her search. While Porsche can search for herself, this does mean we only have 12 targets in total, so the search might not always hit, but we still get the body out. It's gravy at that point. And our other Foxy Pirates are Gina, a searchable 2k, and Tony Chopper. Our low man is a chump blocker, 2 cost, 0 power, and on play we can ramp 1 if we're behind. Reiju still has a very versatile playstyle that can reward players who are able to stay conscious of the game state and pivot accordingly. Lots of potential for aggression, lots of potential for resource generation. Not oppressive by any means, but she finally has a home in the set 7 format. Here's the first card count slide. Everything in the majority has been explained in the profile. And for these more fringe inclusions, we have Kaya, another 2k that lets us fuel our trash and draw cards. The promo Sanji to let us stack our top deck. 1-cost Sanji to let us -1 and then draw a card. Both of these are searchable as Germa targets. The 6-cost Sanji from set 7. Gion, another 2k, Nami tech. Black Bug for a control option. Bone Clay for more ramp and to take advantage of taller bodies our opponent might play, as well as Yonji if you really want to round out those judge turns. Our 10 most cuttable cards are the 2 copies of Germa 66, the Gina, and then potentially Queen and Pudding. And are there additions though? Third Pudding is the basically 51st card. Then we have that promo Sanji, the Kaya, all of the Sanjis, and maybe a third Germa 66. And that's Reiju. I am very excited to see what she can do post-ban. And now we get into an old favorite with number 5, my guy, the Donut Daddy Katakuri. Now, this is the point where the ranking system I'm trying for this video, which, again, it's my first time doing it. There may be revisions to this or to the deck construction as I go further, especially for the OP08 video coming soon. This is where things might start to shuffle around a little bit, especially as, each Nationals reacts to the last Nationals, because these really are the first big tournaments we're having of this format. And I mention this here because Katakuri does have the highest raw win rate of any of these decks. Of course, 8,700 games is not a small sample size, but he has been played significantly less than these other decks we're going to talk about. And I may find more layers to add to my process as time goes on, but for now, I'll put Katakuri at number 5, which is still a very, very good spot. Don't sleep on him just because he's not at the very top. We are entering a new echelon of decks when we get to this point in the video. Tenmom really never stopped being a great card. The late game she gives us is stupendous. One of the main things holding Katakuri back this format really has been the rise of Red Purple Law, and the fact that this deck can only survive so many 5k swings before it gets to play the Tenmoms. These other decks at the top are still able to compete with that though, especially a really good Lucci player, presumably even without the stage. But we still have plenty of bodies that come out from Trigger. We have the Perospero. We even have the Sanji, who hadn't seen play in a while. We have Kikunojo, whose effect is much more likely to be live in Katakuri than she would be in Enel. We even have Satori here. 7 Mom on curve can be devastating. We have a full 4 copies of Disappear to filter those out and then potentially get that extra life. Again, we send this straight to the bottom if we see it off ability. And then 2 copies of Thunderbolt. This one did surprise me at first. I would have expected to see it make the cut in Black Yellow Luffy before Katakuri, but there are still some strategies that can go relatively wide, which can be a problem for Katakuri. This gives us another chance to get those out of the way, or a reliable way to get that last blocker out of the way while still being able to buff our characters as much as possible. As we head into the card counts, we'll see that there are a lot fewer cards that were in the majority for these game-winning lists compared to the other decks we have talked about. Katakuri being such a wonderfully generic leader and Yellow having such a strong card pool gives people a lot of options to chef with when they're building this deck. Those 10 are pretty much obligatory, but we do see a couple of those more fringe options making their way into the showcased list right here, being the Thunderbolt and the Sanji. Well, maybe not super fringe for those ones. They're very, very close to 50%, as was the 8-cost Katakuri. He was very close to make it into this list. Great if you are trying to starve Bonnie out, get rid of their 8-cost kid, or if you really need to get rid of a Gecko Moria against black. Amaru can combo quite well with Thunderbolt if there is a second blocker we need to get out of the way at the end. Amande is another potential searchable 2k. Oh, and then we see Satori making his way into the list as well, but he could very well be substituted out for Frankie. Frankie just might not be live as often as he is in Enel. Flame Split is incredibly versatile. I'm a big fan of this card. Same utility as Amaru, but it depends on our opponent's life instead, and it could also give us 1k counter on our opponent's turn if we're in a pinch. And then running through the rest of these nice and quick, we have Vanilla Perospero, Brûlé to jump out of Trigger as a blocker, Shirahoshi, block and potentially get us a life, Luffy if we want more mid-range removal, Streusen, another 2k, and then Neko Mamushi and Cracker for a couple of other options for characters that can jump out of Trigger. Cuts and additions are quite self-explanatory here. Sanji, Satori, Thunderbolt, those can all be shaved in favor of all these options I mentioned, but particularly Frankie, Katakuri, or Amande. And now we get to our first mono black deck of the video with Gecko Moria. His presence definitely started picking up a little bit before the ban. I believe it was one of the Gen Con events that somebody won with Moria. To me, this deck never stopped being strong. Lucci just became the better option, especially when it was at full strength. Black Yellow Luffy was definitely keeping him down a bit in this first part of 07, but I think that he can very well take advantage of this new landscape he is running into. We are still running our combination of the Thriller Bark and Navy packages. Still 4 of all our great Thriller Bark cards. 4 Branu, 3 Hina, 3 Rebecca, 3 each of Sakazuki and Issue. Still great for the Black Yellow Luffy matchup if we run into it, but they give us utility pretty much anywhere. A full 4 copies of Sabo, especially if we run into any black mirrors. Moria did abandon the 4-cost Rob Lucci at the start of Set 7, and that trend prevails here. But this list does play 3 copies of the EB01 Brook. 3 costs, so you can easily play him early game. You can bring him back with Rebecca, make the most out of those Moria plays. And the great thing about him is that when we do need to remove cards, he can take a little bit of pressure off of Absalom, let us have a little more freedom to use our leader ability for our Perona or our Hogback. And then rounding it off, we do have 1 copy of Ice Age. Heading into our card count slides, I don't think we're going to see anything too surprising in that first row. But when it comes to that bottom right corner, there was a bit of a struggle between Ice Age and Brook. In order to get us to at least 50 cards, I ended up with a total of, I believe it was 3 Brook and 4 Ice Age, and then I had to look at these win numbers to try and figure out what combination had the most number of wins overall. It ended up being the 3 Brook, 1 Ice Age, but there is plenty of room to adjust those ratios as you see fit. And then the card that just didn't make it in was Borsellino. He stopped seeing play, I want to say around EB01, the part in Set 6 where Sakazuki became dominant again, where we got the HQ Sakazuki, and then stayed pretty obscure because Red Purple Law could just use 1 Gordon and get rid of him. I will say that now Borsellino has so much more value, especially depending on how this landscape of the top decks goes. If we see Katakuri go up, if we see Black go up, I think that he gets an even better chance at a spot in these Moria decks. Aside from that, only a couple of cards on the more fringe scale. We have the Kuzan, 42% prevalence. Stussy, if we really want to take care of something big. Lucci, I know we talked about that. I don't think it's the deck's focus. Some people did. And I know some people like playing with Negative Hollow, really emphasizing the hand control here. It could be spicy. I've never been one to cut something for it, but, you know, it works 100% of the time, 5% of the time. Potential cuts are the 1 Ice Age, the 3 Brook, our Helmeppo, our Sakazuki. That 4th Branu, really, that was just to bring this to 10 cuts. And then we can very easily add in some Ice Age, some Borsellino, a couple Kuzan, or round out our 2Ks Lasuru. And then finishing out the B tier is the deck I chose to main in the first part of 07. It's Enel. And looking at this list, he didn't get the memo. He didn't realize there was a ban list. For someone who played more Enel than anything else these past couple months, I don't have much to say about him. Okay, I'll just talk to y'all a bit about my relationship with Enel. I am a player who loves a grind game. I really enjoy stall strategies. In One Piece, I've come to really love starving my opponent's life, getting them to a low hand. I love some control. I really love playing my own big bodies. Enel hits all of those notes. After I hit about 100 ranked/tournament games with him, though, and I know that's not a lot for some people, that's just a lot for me as far as how much time I have to play, I was ready to play something else. I wasn't done with Enel. I had nothing against him. I felt we need to see other people, you know? But that's nothing on him. That's more about me. I think that overall, Enel does benefit from the ban. Law really felt to me like one of those few decks that you couldn't just reliably be 50-50 against. And that is another thing I really liked about Enel, the fact that for the most part, you were going pretty much 50-50 across the board, except for into Law and Nami. But I don't even consider that. But outside of my own experience, people are definitely talking about Enel less than they were pre-ban. I think that's because I think we're just focused a little more on decks that benefit from the ban list more drastically than Enel. When it comes to yellow-specific stuff, there is definitely a lot of hype around Katakuri. Deserved hype, I will say. And people also just, might be a little sick of him. Do I think that Enel is a completely skill-less deck that just relies on getting good trigger luck to win the games? Not necessarily, no. I think that an Enel player especially cannot afford to make a mistake against a player who really knows what they're doing. I think that a lot of Enel's victories come from capitalizing off the mistakes of their opponent. I think that the deck's existence is completely valid. But at the same time, Have I had some games where I made one misplay that would have cost me the whole thing if I didn't see a disappear trigger that I put onto the top of my life that next turn? Every now and then. Do I feel good about those? Not really. Are we playing chess? No, we are playing a card game. Variance is going to come into play. But basically, what I'm saying is that I do see people's gripes with this deck. I, as an Enel player and Enel enjoyer, am looking to broaden my horizons for set 8, so take from that what you will. Regardless of our feelings about Enel, though, he did manage to get a 53.4% win rate. That gave him an 86.7 percentile score, actually for number of games played and for win rate. So he is very, very firmly sitting at the top of B tier. All right, so card count slides. We've seen this all before. Next. These fringe cards, though. Sabo is another form of board control. We can eat into our life, get to our leader ability more easily. Hiyori, again, like I said in my initial set 7 videos, definitely fell off in favor of these new triggers. I did see a couple of topping lists pre-ban. I want to say around Gen Con. Don't quote me on that, though. Playing 1 or 2 Hiyori, I think there could be utility there. Compote, big vanilla, big removal resistance. Kikunojo, again, not quite as live as she is in Katakuri. Paraspero, we've got another vanilla. I Am God, or I guess they call it, did someone say Kami in English? I do think 7-cost Enel has been the secret to winning against Lucci. Depending on how Lucci adapts to the Enies Lobby ban, I think there could be an argument for this card. Potentially the same for the Rush Ace. And then we have Linlin and Amaru. I definitely was a Linlin stan as we headed into set 7. After seeing the utility and necessity of 7-cost Enel, I definitely felt the need to remove her to facilitate that inclusion. Amaru, I don't have strong feelings on either way. Could be cool. Probably doesn't feel the most necessary, though. For our cuts, the 5-cost Luffy. I'm not sure we need him as much now that Law is out of the format. The trigger is still great, though. The Shirahoshi of both variety. I know this is grouping all the copies of the card together. That is just a product of the way this data came to me and the way I've had to adapt the algorithm. I'd say definitely shave down the Shirahoshis before getting rid of all of them, but they are shaveable at the very least. Then we have a couple of Kingdom Come on there. This is definitely where we start to hit the wall of removing stuff. If you go a couple slides back, you will see that the skeleton was extremely uniform. For additions, we could go higher on the 5 Luffy, the Kingdom Come. We could start adding in the Sabo if we want to go in a more control-oriented direction. And then we have the Compote, the Hiyori, or a third Shirahoshi, especially for the Compote and Shirahoshi if we want to have an easier time against black. All right, y'all, we got 2 left. Welcome to A tier. Before I talk about the last 2, I just want to show this chart filled in with decks 3 through 10. These last 2 are going to be very, very close to that corner of perfection. For number 2, I am not sure how many people were expecting to see this, but it's Lucci. Whether this is what you expected, whether you thought he would be higher at number 1, or if you thought that he was going to be lower, he is here to stay. There were lists shortly pre-banned that were cutting Enies Lobby anyway and still topping. The removal package this deck has, the utility it gets off of still being able to play 8-cost Moria. I don't know if I'd say I'm a die-hard banned Moria person, but I do think it would have been at least interesting to see what the format looked like without him. Either way, it can still combo off beautifully and is an amazing pick for any post-ban set 7 tourneys. Still playing our Suru, Spandam, Helmeppo, Spandine, the 2 Brook, Khalifa, Rebecca, Lucci, Set 7 Kaku, the Sabo, Isho, Moria, Tempest Kick, Finger Gun, that start coming in at the tail end of pre-ban Set 7. Really, the main substitution with the absence of Enies Lobby is just playing more Ice Age. Just trading that consistent, long-term, full-game, small cost reduction for these 3 big spikes in combo power. And if you use them well, that can be all you need with the other reduction this deck has. I also want to point out the 2 copies of Set 6 Brook. I know this was showing up every now and then. I've been a big fan of the card. You'll notice that there are no copies of the Set 3 Kaku. Brook does cost 1 more than Kaku, but he also removes something 1 cost higher than Kaku. The trash cycling can also come in handy against black mirrors. He also does not require you to bottom deck cards from your trash for his removal option, and his removal is just a place in trash, not a KO. He can get around Sabo immunity. As can the Nightmare Luffy. We have 2 copies of that in this list. He lets us trash an opponent's character with a cost of 2 or less. Again, trash, not KO. We love that. And then we can send any number of characters from our trash to the bottom of our deck as long as they have a cost of 4 or greater. And then for every 3, he gets another 1,000 power. This is a when attacking effect, so as long as he stays on the board, you can keep on using this. I remember from my own experience playing Enel, I absolutely hated it anytime I saw a Lucci player slot the Nightmare Luffy into the deck. Black Yellow Luffy hates it as well. But I can't deny it's cool, and I can't deny that I am a fan of seeing it in this list here. Here are the card counts. Everything up till Ice Age was in over 90%. We see our first big jump coming when we get from Suru to Brook. And on the second slide, we do see the set 3 Kaku in at 51%, so technically in the majority. The way I did my algorithm for this one is I prioritized the number of wins at each individual count. That is why really the Nightmare Luffy in particular overcame him. But, you know, he is searchable. He can still hit a 3 cost. I think that there is still an argument to be made to playing him. I have seen a lot of hype around 6 King Gun. I think that it's a good one. Borsalino, good for the same reasons that we talked about in Moria. 7 cost Sabo can still really do some damage, but I don't think he is as pressingly needed as he was when Law was still in the format. Then we got some spicy cards, the Stussy, the Kuzan, the Soap Sheep. I was a Soap Sheep truther at the start of post-ban. I'm glad to see some people are still on that, as well as brand new Orhina. Easy cuts are the 2 Nightmare Luffy, the 4th Sabo, our Ice Age, our Brook, our Finger Gun. And those next most common inclusions were a 3rd 6 cost Brook, 2 of the Kaku, an Ice Age, our 6 King Pistol, and then at that point, extra copies of the set 7 Kaku, Helmeppo, the 3 cost Brook, or the 5 cost Kaku. And then after seeing Lucci number 2, I'm sure most of us know what's going to be number 1, the MVP of Egghead, Jewelry Bonnie. 56.3% win rate, only slightly lower than Katakuri, 17,691 games as of September 1st, second only to Black Yellow Luffy. The data has spoken. Bonnie is queen. I haven't tested it myself. Apparently Lucci might still be able to give her some trouble even without any slobby, but this leader effect. 1 less attack for your opponent, that is just generically strong. As far as the list itself goes, this will be very familiar to anyone who has been playing set 7. Not a lot has changed. We do still play Eustace Kid, only 2 copies in this list, but the new inclusion is the 5 cost Bonnie from set 7. On play, you can choose one of your opponent's rested characters or Don and make it so it does not refresh at the start of their next turn. Stunning your opponent's characters can be the name of the game in this deck, but in those early turns, if you want to stop your opponent from playing their big threat on curve, she can do wonders. This is another card that benefits greatly from Law being out of the format, because with Law, there wasn't really a set curve. They always had options no matter what amount of Dawn they were at. They were always able to keep flooding the board, so it didn't really matter too much if you rested one of their characters anyway. But post-ban, Bonnie is in such a good spot. And I want to see her do well. We haven't had a green deck at the top for a while. Someone, please, win Nats with Bonnie. Win Dallas with Bonnie. I beg you. I really, really want to see it. The deck is rather uniform until we get to, I want to say, the Rosinante, the Kid. Then some players became a little more divided on whether to round out the Don Quixote package. Still a good 3/4 making that 10-drop Dofi and those 2Ks searchable. As far as other options, we have Bartolomeo, another blocker we can bring out with our 8-drop Kid. Potential for some card draw there, but not the most consistent thing. Apu if you want to lean heavier into the Supernovas and have that 2K be searchable. I know there are some fans of this 8-drop Rosinante. I remember seeing him be pretty popular in the Eastern version of 07. And with Lucci right below, some players have been successful with keeping those 5-cost characters immune to KO effects. Izo for another 2K, we can get aggressive and rest our opponent's blockers. Diaz Drake, another form of board control. I'm just especially attached to this card. I do love him. I just have very good memories of playing with him in set 1. I just miss him. I'm biased. Dellinger as another way to make sure our leader effect is live while we make the most of our curve. More pizza can get us more supernovas. If you are on the 8-cost Rocinante train, this 5-cost Luffy from set 7 could give your smaller body some KO resistance as well. And finishing things off, we have the set 2 Carrot and the Star Deck 2 Law to either unrest our Don or our characters. Our easiest cuts will be our 2 EB01 Apu, the 3rd Whoever Wins, our Baby 5, our 4th Doflamingo, or our 2 Eustace Kid. But our additions are a 3rd Eustace Kid, a 4th Rocinante, and then some Bartolomeo, some extra Zoro, a 3rd Bonnie, or those 2 Izo. Really 4, again, we're just keeping this to 10. And that is OP07 post-ban. I know that this video might not be as broadly useful as my other content has been in the past, but I really did want to put something out about post-ban. As I record this, I did see the results from Liverpool come in, and there were a couple surprises. Star Deck 14 Luffy was an amazing meta call by a small group of players. Only 19 brought him to the tournament. That was a little under 2% of the players overall, so huge props to that group. I wish I could have called that, but, I'm not a prophet. I'm just a retrospective analyst who loves his spreadsheets. Black Yellow Luffy and Nami also did better than these rankings would have suggested, and I think that does speak to the sheer difference in skill between these Nationals players and the entire population of OPBounty as a whole. Definitely something I'd love to see if I can adjust for when we get to the next National season. But if you made it this far, I do appreciate you sticking around for a more experimental analysis than what I usually put out. This really was a test run for my OP08 video at the end of the day, and I am seeing a couple ways I can tweak my process for that one. I am very excited to record it. I'm already starting to tabulate the deck lists, and my goal is to get that out by release day on the 13th. This week is going to be very crazy, so I won't make promises. I have learned not to do that, but keep an eye out. It'll be out relatively soon. Now, if you enjoyed the video, let me know by leaving a like or sharing your own thoughts in the comments. And if you want to get notified as soon as the OP08 analysis comes out, then feel free to subscribe. It has been crazy trying to get this out. It's 104 degrees in LA. My AC is busted. I'm recording in my car. But knowing there are people who find what I have to say to be useful is huge motivation to keep working. I'll make it work for y'all. And one more thing before I go, for any manga fans out there, I have started making short reviews for new chapters of the series I'm reading in Weekly Shonen Jump. If you're interested, you can check those out. So far, they're just on TikTok. That's going to be will_of_k. I do plan to add them to a new YouTube channel and other platforms pretty soon. Hopefully tonight as well. Links will be in the description. All in all, I've really enjoyed taking this look at the post-ban OP07 format, and I hope you have too. This is Sakura Kingdom. I'm going to take a manga break and get back to the OP08 spreadsheet, and I'll see you real soon.